And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. I'm very sorry about the delay. It was originally going to be on at 7. It's not 25 minutes past that. But today's episode is going to be worth it because we're compacting a lot of in-depth topics in here, talking about the Big Ten's three-man race and also my top 10 teams, and also doing a question and answer session at the end of the live stream, so make sure to stick around for that. But before we get started and before we dive deep, how are you guys doing? Talk to me. Looks like the chat has been very active despite my absence. Safe to say. Looks like y'all were talking about where you were born and the fact that some of you don't root for the state where you were born in. Pretty good, says Beetle Beetle. Iowa still sucks. That's, yeah. Deacon Hill is so inaccurate that he can't throw interceptions. That's kind of the story there. Chris Lane, tired. Sam, yeah, I've had a very long workday actually. Like, I've produced tons of content, more to be seen tomorrow. Thank you, Chris, for your answer. Black Cat says ready for second half of the season. Nathaniel Lathy says I'm good. Vacationing in West Texas. I hope your vacation is going extravagantly. PJ Fleck's head is being called for from a lot of Gophers fans. Why is that? Is that because the blowout? Or is there something off the field I didn't hear about? Tell me more about that, Brownie College Football. I mean, we haven't seen him get dominated this hard at Minnesota. We've never seen that before. The closest comparison I can draw, I think, is Ohio State beating Minnesota in 2021. And I think the score of that game was like 49-24 or 49-30. Yeah, 45-31 was the final score of that game. And it turned out that Minnesota's offense that year wasn't that good. I know that Ibrahim got injured during that game, but that game said a lot more about Ohio State's defense and their physicality up front than it ended up saying about Minnesota having this powerful offense of theirs. Going back to the chat, just relaxing after work here, Sam. Good for you, music for me, 007. You deserve it. Inverted Thrills, do you think Michigan-Ohio State will be a very low-scoring game? We'll get into that at the end of the episode during the question and ask session, but I'll answer your question here and say, the winning team's probably going to score in the low 30s, the losing team's probably going to score in the high 20s. That's what I would say. Brownie College Football, Rutgers is favored over Michigan State, probably their first time being favored over MSU in the Big Ten. Yeah, I agree with that. SFS Inverted, can't wait to hear your prediction about Ohio State and Penn State. I know you picked us to win at the beginning of the season, but if our offense doesn't play from start to finish, I really don't know. I still lean Ohio State here, though not as dominantly as I did in the preseason, but who knows? I mean, if Ohio State comes out and they look like garbage against Purdue, and Aller barely even tries and looks, I know it's UMass, but there could be a way, although very unlikely, that I pick Penn State to win. It's more likely that I pick Penn State to beat Michigan, just because if Penn State, let's say, comes out and dominates Ohio State, and Michigan goes back to looking like they did against Bowling Green. This is really the first test for Penn State all season, if I'm really being honest. And just given James Franklin's history and how this team looks, like we'll get to in this video, it's unlikely. Penn State beat us 45-17. Yeah, that was close. That was the next most dominant performance that a team had against Minnesota under PJ Fleck. Is that why people are calling for his head? Is because, like, past 2, 3 seasons, he's been great against teams who have less talent or equal talent, but against more talented teams, he just folds? Howdy do, Chimichanga guy. Again, donations are never expected, but they are always appreciated. 600 to 700 on a dentist appointment in the next day. That stinks. That really stinks. Well, hopefully that goes all in well and that your teeth stay healthy for as long as humanly possible. Thank you for being a regular on the show. I saw your comment on the Ohio State Purdue game. I think I might have replied to it. I don't think I did, but I'll be sure to get to that tonight when I work some more and reply to more comments. And then final question before we'll dive into stuff. And between topics, I will check in on the chat. Do you think Ohio State's 17-14 win over Notre Dame looks much less impressive now that Notre Dame lost to Louisville? Potential power. By the way, guys, whether you want to make a donation or whether you want to get insider access to potential power, check out my Patreon page. And I'll sort of explain why in these next few seconds, answering Inverted Thrill's question. Potential power, along with most power ranking systems, view Notre Dame's loss to Louisville as like a total fluke, which I think it is. And Josh Pate, as much as I sometimes disagree with him and other people, he said it perfectly right. I mean, he called it perfectly, that Notre Dame's lost to Louisville. He predicted that to happen. That's an area where I got wrong. I thought Notre Dame was going to dominate that game. Exhaustion, exhaustion, exhaustion. Those are the only words I have to describe why Notre Dame lost to Louisville. Back-to-back road night games. They had their hearts taken out of their bodies when Ohio State ran in for that final touchdown. They needed a loss or a majestic... They needed something that wasn't in the realm of normality to be woken up. I think we're going to see them play a much better game against USC, or maybe they'll collapse against USC. One of the two. I don't think Ohio State's win over Notre Dame isn't much less impressive. It doesn't carry the same weight. It isn't as impressive, but it's not like we get to look at Ohio State and say, well, their strength of schedule is horrible now because of that loss. Like, Maryland's 5-1, Notre Dame's 5-2. Look, I think that Notre Dame, I'm going to do a preview of USC and Notre Dame that'll probably release later tonight or early tomorrow morning, especially to target USC fans because they're joining the Big Ten and because it's an interesting matchup. I think you're going to see Notre Dame play USC close, if not outright win. Michael Valadez. Sam, I'm still heartbroken and depressed that y'all really blew us, Nebraska, out of the game. Yeah, well, I hate to say this. I can't even apologize for the team or say that I don't want to apologize for the team because I'm not on the team. But I'm not sorry that that happened. However, I hope you win out for the rest of the season. I hope Nebraska goes 9-3. Highly doubt that's possible, but 7-5 and 8-4 is a possibility. I'm totally ignoring the comment involving he who shall not be named, though. Minnesota fans have been mad since that Bowling Green loss. PJ can't recruit. Winless against Iowa. Minnesota fans expect more from him, but they think he won't sniff expectations. I'm still rowing. I think he's a good coach, and I think with that new TV money, I wouldn't be surprised if Fleck utilized it better than some other middle-of-the-road programs and uses it to up Minnesota's game, but he's totally a developmental guy. I mean, the coach in the Big Ten right now who's closest to Mark D'Antonio, I think, is PJ Fleck. And Mark D'Antonio was a unicorn doing what he did in the realm of recruiting and then translating it to the field. I hope PJ Fleck has more success than just 8 or 9 wins every year, but after this season where they've underperformed, I'm kind of in a you got to prove you can do better than be a fringe top 25. But that's just me. You know, Sam, you'd probably look better in scarlet and gray. You'll see this in future live streams, but I have a college football with Sam's sweater right here. I have one in white as well. And I have a Michigan and Ohio State and black and white themed t-shirt that are all college football with Sam branded. They're very comfortable as long as you air dry them or turn the sweaters inside out when you dry them in your dryer. The logo won't come off. So make sure to check out my merchandise page in the description if you want to represent the brand. Thank you guys very much for coming on, though. Let's get started here. Brownie College Football, you bring up a good point, by the way, about if I'm a recruit, why would I want to go to Minnesota? A lot of people don't. Cold weather, other things, etc. But let's get into the topic of, well, why we're doing this live show tonight. And the top 10 is something that is the highlight here, but I don't want to get into it quite yet. I want to start off with something different here. And what I want to start off with is talking about the Big Ten and the three-man race for the Big Ten. Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. Pardon me, I'm a little tired, but those are the three teams right now who are competing for the Big Ten. Those are the three teams. And I look at all three of them, and Michigan doesn't have a big weakness, but there's something there in terms of they haven't been tested. That's a valid argument. And also the fact that they sometimes do play brain dead, like Bowling Green, for example. And their secondary, I think, might be susceptible to big plays because what we saw with Daniel Jackson at Minnesota and what we saw with Billy Kemp with Nebraska, these were against starters, by the way. These were not against backups. And then Christian Dremel with Rutgers. I think there's something to that the secondary is vulnerable to big plays. Now, that doesn't mean it's not an elite secondary because outside of those, like what can honestly be described as, you get one big play from the opponent passing game per game, and that's it. That's not really a drag on the secondary. That's just nitpicking. But against an Ohio State, if Kyle McCord and the wide receivers are on point, or against, let's travel back in time, Bryce Young and Jameson Williams, that could lead to some issues, especially if the offense isn't operating at peak efficiency. It could really be a problem against, bigger opponents. Ohio State has the toughest strength of schedule out of the three, but honestly, they look the least efficient out of the three. Ohio State's much more talented than Michigan and Penn State. Yet, in my mind, Ohio State looks exactly like Penn State, except defensively they have less upside, but they're more consistent. And offensively, they, as of the Maryland game and as of without Henderson, they're worse than running the football at Penn State. Yet, with pass block and also receiving and passing, they're much better. On average, I'd say they're probably the same as Penn State running the football, if not a little better. I think they had a pretty bad performance against Maryland with the offensive line relative to their normal performance. They looked better in the trenches against Notre Dame and even against all of their original opponents outside of Indiana compared to Maryland. But maybe Maryland does have a good defense, and a concern about Ohio State becomes against good or great defenses. Can you run the football for more than, 6 feet? Which is like my height. Can you run the football for more than the height of college football with Sam transposed on a level playing field? Because if you can't, then you don't have a run game. That's Ohio State's concern. Penn State's concern is you've offensively regressed from last year. Your defense looks a lot better than I expected it to in the preseason. Your tackles, despite not being huge, are much better than last year. They're good at rushing the passer, same with the defensive ends. The secondary looks as good as ever. And Drew Aller, he does have more upside than Sean Clifford, but to go back to the weakness, he does have that lower floor. So that's sort of the premise behind all of this. There's some statistics that I'll talk about, and I'll revisit some of the points that I just made. But that's what we're going to get into right now. That's funny. I started on the wrong slide, but you did not know that. Okay, so first and foremost, Penn State, we're going to talk about them first just because I think they're the third best team in the Big Ten. And then we'll go to number 2, number 1. But we can all safely assume that Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan are a part of Tier 1. Penn State, they're number 10 according to Potential Power, which is my personal power ranking system. As I mentioned earlier, check out my Patreon page if you're curious about becoming an insider of Potential Power and getting all the Potential Power rankings, not just a select few. And Penn State's 7th according to Football Power Index. They're given a 21.5% chance to win the Big Ten via FPI. And looking at points per play margin, which points per play margin, Georgia was number 1 in that category in 21 and 22. Clemson was number 1 in that category in 2018. It's very accurate at predicting the best of the best teams. Like when you line up end of season points per play margin and end of season rankings and playoff success, there's a heavy correlation there. So I'm testing to see if it's also accurate at helping me predict regular season games. And so far, Potential Power is 42-30 against the spread, in a sizable part thanks to me factoring in points per play margin and also yards per point margin. Penn State's 12th in points per play margin. They're inside the top 10 in my power rankings and ESPN's. I think they're top 10 in S&P Plus, though I haven't paid for an ESPN Plus membership. And they're given about a 1 in 5 chance, a little over that, of winning the Big Ten. So what do we know about Penn State so far? Well, we know that Penn State is 5-0. We know that the Nittany Lions, under James Franklin, they love to run the football. That's facts. And we know that they're a great team. They're a great team, and they pound upon the weak. And they're extremely impressive on defense. Right now, I think they lead the Big Ten in sacks. And they have Keelan King, they have Johnny Dixon, they have Keaton Ellis. They have a plethora of great players. It's just phenomenal. I'm going to get back to this very quickly, but before I resume, I wanted to get to the super chat that was added by Blue Wolverine. Thank you for the $5. Don't need to be tested to be elite. Very solid team, but I guess if you look hard enough, you will find potential weaknesses. Yeah, then really that's what I was doing. Is just looking at potential weaknesses there. So thank you, Wolverine, for the $5 super chat. I appreciate it very much. And there are some other comments, so I'll get to those, but after we talk about this. Now, looking at Penn State, going back to what I was saying, and just really wanted to get to that super chat there because, donations are never expected, but they are always appreciated. Penn State, the pro of this team is defensive explosiveness, really pass defense overall, pass rush. They're a great team. They're elite defensively. They're disciplined. They're very aggressive on defense, but disciplined at the same time. We saw this against Illinois, where they got burned maybe 1, 2, or 3 times, but outside of that, they picked off Altmaier. They sacked him several times. They stuffed Illinois' run game, especially later on. Great defense. I have little to no complaints about their defense, -1. And that is really against only Michigan, because I don't trust Ohio State's run game right now. Against Michigan, can you stop Michigan from having 40 minutes of possession and running it down your throat? Because I still think the answer to that question is no. Unless you zero blitz, and Michigan with Roman Wilson and J.J. McCarthy then could just tear you up through the air. So that's the only complaint I have about their defense, but their defense really isn't their problem. If they had more consistency on offense, if they could run the football, and if they could pass the football, they're passing the football for under 7 yards per pass attempt and under or around 4 yards per rush attempt right now. I mean, those are very low numbers. This is a team that is consistent in a lot of areas on offense, but consistent in being not explosive. They're one of the least explosive offenses in all of college football. And Aller's accuracy is a huge part of that, and also the fact that their offensive line, I think, has regressed since last year. I think Juice Scruggs is very much missed right now on the interior, because I look at their interior play, and they can't run unless they get to the outside. And that was evident against Northwestern, in my mind. So offensively, I have a lot to criticize. Defense, I have a lot to praise. On offense, I think Lambert Smith is great, but Nicholas Singleton and Allen at some point have to get going, because if they don't, the game rests on Aller, and I don't trust him against Ohio State and Michigan's secondary and linebacker core to make big plays. I mean, Michigan has 3 pick sixes. They have, 7 interceptions. Ohio State has about the same amount of interceptions, and I think they have 1 or 2 pick sixes. I mean, Michigan and Ohio State's defense, they will make you pay for turnovers. They will, especially for Ohio State in the second half. And for Michigan, I would say, you come out of the gate in Michigan's defense. I mean, it takes them about a drive to figure out your offense. So it for me, I look at Penn State, and they're very much in that clear third position until that Ohio State game. And then maybe I'll reassess, likely if they beat the Buckeyes, because statistically, it's pretty clear they're the third best team in the Big Ten unless you look at FPI, and they're the second best team in the Big Ten, and they're losing that advantage. Michigan was ranked third by a distant place in FPI, but they've been catching up because they've been scoring more points. That's the faulty thing about FPI, by the way, is it literally is, in all intents and purposes, its intent is a betting tool, which is pretty hysterical, because if you run up the score, FPI gives you a boost, and if you call it quits in the third quarter, then FPI hates you. Gross exaggeration, obviously, but yeah, Penn State, I think, is clear at number 3. They have the potential to be number 1 still, just because they haven't lost a game yet, and they do have that elite defense, but their offense needs to get more consistent. I mean, Ohio State's offense, here we are talking about the Buckeyes, and Ohio State's offense is, at this point, not special either. Whoop, we got another super chat. Got to check that out. Okay. Chris Lane, thank you very much. Chris Lane says, hit the like button. Go Buckeyes. Yeah. If y'all could hit the like button and subscribe, thank you very much, Chris, for the $2. I hope you're highlighted on here. No, you were just a minute ago. Thank you very much for the super chat, Chris. I appreciate you guys a lot. When we get into my top 10, by the way, I'm going to try and re-release that as a video tomorrow, just because I know people like the top 10 in video format. So I'm not going to be replying to the chat, even for super chats, when we get into my top 10. But thank you to those of you who've donated, and at the end of my top 10, when we get to questions and answers, I will check for super chats, or I will go back through chats and pick out things that have interested me, amongst other things. So thank you for being very engageful during the question and answer session. Try and save any of your questions that you want me to answer for the question and answer, and we'll spend a lot of time there. SFS inverted, it's not a stupid question. What's FPI? FPI is Football Power Index. Look up ESPN FPI, and it will give you a good explanation. Basically, FPI power ranks teams from 1 all the way to 131 based off of who would be favored over who on a neutral field. It's sort of what I based potential power off of, except potential power tries to predict who would beat who on a neutral field, not necessarily who would be favored over who on a neutral field. That's why FPI takes into account points allowed per game and points scored per game more seriously than my potential power rankings do. I think, from what I've garnered, my potential power is more interested in predicting the outcomes of games, while FPI is more interested in predicting like the spread or who would be favored, so on and so forth. But who knows? I mean, I've been confused about FPI since day one. Josh Pate's power rankings are much more clear than the FPI is, because he's just point blank who would be favored over who on a neutral field. That's it. That's clear explanation. FPI, I don't know whether it's trying to predict games, whether it's trying to predict spreads, a mix of both. Mine's trying to predict games and the outcome of games. That's what the PP abbreviation on the screen is for, potential power. And then it tries to predict spreads as like a secondary to picking games. But thank you. That's a very good question, actually. What is FPI? I'll tell you what FPI is. It's sometimes very delusional. But Georgia was number 1 in 2021 and 2022. Typically, the national champion every year has always been sitting at ESPN's FPI number 1 spot for quite some time before they end up going and winning the national title. It's a very accurate prediction machine by the end of the season. Preseason and early in the season, sometimes in the middle, though, it can be pretty gnarly. But to talk about Ohio State, they're number 2 in my potential power rankings, and they're number 1 in football power, according to ESPN. They're given a 41.8% chance to win the Big Ten, and that's according to FPI as well. And their points per play margin is 0.378, which is 6th, so significantly better than Penn State. I look at this team, and I think they're second in the Big Ten. And the primary reason that I believe they're second in the Big Ten really is due to the fact of a combination of things. Their talent advantage, which is by far number 1 in the Big Ten. What holds them back from being number 1 is their efficiency. According to ESPN, I think they have the 12th most efficient offense, or the 10th most efficient offense, and the 12th or 10th most efficient defense. That's off of memory, but they really, on both sides of the football, aren't at that, at least in my mind, they're not yet at that, they're not close to being number 1 on offense, and they're closer to being number 1 on defense, but I don't think they're the best defense in all of college football. So it's unusual to see this for Ohio State, because typically they're very dominant on one side of the football in college football. And in 2019, they were dominant on both sides. 2022, it looked like they were, and then the defense fell apart at the end of the year against great offenses. I think this defense is very stout. I think it's an elite defense. Their pass defense is awesome. I think their secondary is the best in America right now. I think Josh Proctor and Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock, Lathan Ransom, Igbinosun, and Sonny Styles, their secondary is the deepest and best performing in all of college football right now. I don't know if Denzel Burke has yet to allow a completed pass on him yet. I saw that Proctor or Ransom, I think, got burned in the Maryland game. I don't know if Burke was even heavily targeted, or if he was, nothing successful happened. I mean, their secondary is amazing. And the reason Maryland was able to pass on Ohio State is they were also able to run. So they were playing complementary football. And Ohio State's offense was just going 3 and out. So the defense has got to be frustrated at that. That's the gripe I have about Ohio State. It's similar to Penn State, except I think Ohio State's defense overall is better than Penn State's defense right now. Some may call that heresy, but what I will say behind that is I think Penn State's defense is a better ceiling. I'm just concerned about Penn State's defensive tackle room. I'm not concerned about any room for Ohio State on defense, including the defensive ends. The defensive ends, I think, are underrated in terms of sacks. They get more pressure than what's advertised by sack numbers. And Sawyer's taken a step forward. Tui Moalau had a good game against Maryland. I think their defense is great. The problem for them is offensively, what are you doing? They're trying to set up the pass by running, when that's not at all how this team is built. The offensive line is suffering from poor recruiting. And Kyle McCord looks like an improved version of Cade McNamara. He's not as good as CJ Stroud. He's not as good as Justin Fields. And I mean, I think the best that he could be, and this would be very good, this would be an elite quarterback, still not at Stroud or Fields level, but close, would be resembling the late Dwayne Haskins. Rest in peace to him. That'd be the closest that McCord could, the highlight of McCord. His ceiling would be that. But he's not there yet. He's in fact not close. Haskins had over 40 passing touchdowns in 2018. McCord right now has 8. He has a pick. His accuracy, while it has, highlight reels sometimes written all over it, sometimes is not good, and his arm strength is questionable. He's a good quarterback. In fact, I'd say he's a great quarterback. ESPN's QBR thinks he's a near elite quarterback, but I think that's more sort of the product of the system. He has a great tight end in Cade Stover. Marvin Harrison Jr. is averaging 20 yards per reception, and he has 499 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. And Ohio State's offensive line's very good at pass block. I mean, their tackles have been well at pass block. Their guards and center have. Their problem's run blocking. Their tackles are atrocious at run blocking. And their guards have been performing worse at run blocking along with center than I've expected. So Ohio State and the Buckeyes, they're number 2 for me in the Big Ten. And according to potential power, they're actually closer to Michigan than Penn State is to them. It's very fascinating. Like, even with some of these performances that people look at and kind of cringe at, Ohio State via advanced analytics, whether it's points per play margin or yards per point margin, they're not far behind Michigan, at least in placement. Like, in actual numbers, there is a sizable distance, but advanced analytics would actually suggest, not from FPI, but from teamrankings.com, like defense, offense, looking at different drives and also seconds taken off the clock and these other factors, Ohio State is suggested probably as being closer to Michigan than Penn State is to them. So Ohio State and Michigan, I'd say, are still in that Tier 1A, and Penn State's in that Tier 1B. Or maybe an accurate way of saying this is, let's say, there's 1 point. This might be a bad analogy. There's 1 point for each Big Ten team that's in the top 3. And typically, if all teams performed at an even level, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State would each get 1 total point. But let's say the 3 points are divvied up by performance on the field. Well, here's how it would probably go. Michigan gets 1.25 points. Ohio State gets 1.1 points. That's a total of 2.35 points. Penn State gets 0.65 points. And that might be over-exaggerating it, but Ohio State is closer to Michigan than Penn State is to them. And I'm very curious to see how that reflects in the game. I'm also curious to see if I'm totally wrong about Penn State, along with advanced analytics, and Penn State is just hiding something from us. They do have the talent at quarterback, but Ohio State's number 2 in the Big Ten for me. Michigan's number 1, and they're number 1 according to potential power. They're 8th according to FPI, but despite being 8th in FPI, they're given a better chance slightly than Penn State to win the Big Ten, a 21.9% chance. The reason for that is a 3-way tie between all of these teams is somewhat expected, given that Ohio State is falling in FPI, Penn State stayed stable, and Michigan's skyrocketing after their first 2 games. 11-1 is kind of the expectation that these teams land in a 3-way tie, and whoever goes to Indianapolis of that 3-way tie will have to have the best cross-divisional schedule, which, given that Ohio State has Minnesota and Wisconsin's still undefeated in conference, they would likely get the nod. Michigan has Minnesota and Nebraska. They'd likely be number 2 there. Penn State has Illinois, who's winless in conference, Northwestern, who's horrible, and Iowa's probably overinflated. Like, I think Iowa is almost guaranteed to lose 2, if not 3 more games before the season ends. I cannot see them winning the West, honestly, with how their defense has taken a step back and their offense is even worse than last year. I can, of course, see them winning the West, but I have a hard time, especially with Wisconsin and Iowa playing on the road against the Badgers this weekend. Michigan in points per play margin is 0.499. What that means is every play they run, they score about a half point. That's first. That's ahead of even USC. USC is an insane points per play margin as well. A lot of that is due to the fact that they're won by a mile in points per play, which is typically an offensive metric. Their defense brings them all the way down. So USC's a bipolar team. Michigan's totally balanced, and I really expect USC to continue to drop. They've faced an even weaker strength of schedule than Michigan has. I think that Arizona might be better than anyone Michigan's played, but there's a big drop-off from Arizona to everyone else that USC has played all season long. At least Rutgers, Minnesota, and Nebraska are in a familiar tier, and there's a good chance that all of those teams go bowling. I think USC has only played one Power 5 team who will go bowling, and that's Arizona. That's it. So Michigan's extremely balanced. It's harder for me to fish out weaknesses, but I think lack of competition, allowing big plays through the secondary, that could be a weakness. And then I think that at running back, I am concerned personally as a Michigan fan with Donovan Edwards. But again, with how Michigan's looked, I mean, only the real criticism you can give them is their schedule. But Penn State hasn't had much tougher of a schedule. Seriously, I mean, I'll look at ESPN right now and show you guys. This is funny. So you type in ESPN's FPI. And I'm not showing it on the screen, but I'm looking all this stuff up. And you go to resume. You click on the Big Ten in the sorting category, and you look at current strength of schedule. Penn State is 110th. Michigan is 111th. They've basically played the same tough schedule, and yet Michigan is by far the better team in every analytic. So Ohio State's really the only team that can point and laugh at these other two teams with schedule, because Ohio State has played the 54th toughest schedule according to ESPN's strength of schedule resume. Ohio State's played a much tougher schedule. Maryland and Notre Dame are both better than any team Penn State or Michigan has played. So that's what's going in favor of Ohio State, really, is it's their schedule, and the fact that some of their struggles might be attributed to the fact they've played a tough schedule, and also they're still figuring things out. Remember, they lost more production a lot more than Michigan did, so there's probably some more room for growth in comparison to what Michigan has there, adding in their talent. But the Wolverines, outside of their schedule, really don't have any major weaknesses, and that's not me being a Michigan fan. That's looking at the fact that they're number one in ESPN efficiency. They're number one in FEI. They're number one in S&P Plus. They're number one in points per play margin. They're number one in yards per point margin. And their defense is number one in scoring. They've scored more points on defense than they've allowed, for their starters at least. I mean, these statistics are nuts. If you're a purely analytics guy, which is a fault in and of itself because college football isn't solely about numbers, then Michigan's the number one team in all of college football. So that's looking at the Big Ten. I'm going to look at the chat here because I know that there's been a lot in the chat since I started talking, of course. We'll do a little bit of a break here. And then what I'll do is I'll look at the chat, answer some questions, and then get to my top 10. So thank you all very much. I'm going to quickly get a drink of water just because I'm hungry and I haven't eaten yet. So I'll be right back. And there will be a little ad that plays, but I'll be back very quickly. Thank you. Okay, we're back. Thank you all for waiting. Okay, so let's check out the chat here. Okay, first and foremost, Beetle. Georgia is better than Michigan. There's certainly an argument for that. There's an argument that they had the most impressive win of... Why is my face? Okay, good. Green screen just had a little bit of a problem. I'm still trying to figure out how to adjust the green screen. I just think the lighting in my room is really bad. And even though I have like 4 or 5 lights on right now, it's not enough to light up every part of me, which is really sad. So I'm probably going to have to order another ring light here, especially when wearing black or a dark color and the room's naturally dark. Beetle, though. Georgia is greater than Michigan. Well, they had, according to many actually, the more impressive win in Week 6 over Kentucky. And they have a lot more talent than Michigan. And I know that Uncle Lou talked about how, in his view, Michigan and Georgia are basically the same. And since Georgia has a talent advantage over Michigan, that would mean that Michigan would be facing certain death if they played Georgia. Now, I don't think they'd face certain death, because even though Georgia has a talent advantage, I think Michigan right now has an efficiency advantage. I think Michigan is much better currently, like as of today, at utilizing the talent and players they have compared to Georgia. I mean, Georgia's rush defense, suspect. People will say, and it's a fair point, well, the Auburn's quarterback runs inflated that. Well, Kentucky's quarterback can't run. He's a pure pocket passer. J.J. McCarthy can run, so there. Problem for their defense. Their offense, they can't run the football on offense either. How do you think they're going to fare against a defense that right now has been much more efficient than them and much more statistically impressive? Georgia, I also want to look at their strength of schedule. So Michigan's is 111th. Georgia's strength of schedule right now is 85th. It's not much. It's not much better. And they're only 16th in game control. They're 9th in average in-game win probability. And in efficiency, they're 11th. In fact, Alabama is rated as the more efficient team right now. Georgia's the 22nd most efficient defense, the 9th most efficient offense. So they have that talent. They probably have more untapped potential. But I don't know. I mean, there's a debate for it. But I think that Michigan's better at most positions compared to Georgia, at least right now. Like Kentucky, really good team. Like they're good team. They're a better team, I think, than anyone Michigan has faced outside of maybe Minnesota. I think Minnesota has been hit with a very tough schedule already, especially considering North Carolina. And I think Northwestern was just a rare total meltdown. And I think there's a chance they recover from that. Overall, I don't know. Like, I can see it based off of reputation and also resume. If if all you really care about is resume or the past. But I'm someone as shown by coaching rankings where I didn't rank Jimbo Fisher in my top 25 and I had Dabo Swinney outside of my top 3. I'm pretty heavily recency biased, and looking at how Georgia's played this season, I think that Michigan's better than them. I think that there's a large chance that both Washington and Oregon are better than them. You'll actually see where I have all these teams ranked inside of my top 10 in just a few minutes. Just got to make sure that I have my... There. I had to just lean over my phone on me so I can make sure it's timed properly. Music for me, 007. Who has Michigan played that has an offense at all? Good question. They really haven't played anyone who has a great offense. That's all I will say. However, I don't think they'll face too much of a test offensively until... Very careful how I say this. They'll face one against Penn State. I think Ohio State's going to be like by a mile, by a gaping chasm, their biggest test on offense. Maryland has too many turnover issues, and Penn State is just short play there. We try and run, even though we haven't had success. I mean, I see Michigan's defense just eating most offenses alive. And Georgia, for example, who's Georgia play that has a functioning offense? I mean, South Carolina has a better offense than anyone Michigan has played, but South Carolina also might have a worse offensive line than Nebraska, and they probably have a worse defense than Rutgers and Nebraska, maybe even a worse defense than Minnesota's ineffective unit. And then Kentucky, I'd say for now, is a good team. Potential power actually still has them top 20, but that goes more hand in hand with the fact they have great trench play. Really is struggling to account for their, bad quarterback play. Well, that's because I think Devin Leary still has untapped potential. But Michigan hasn't played much of a schedule. The problem is Georgia, Penn State, a lot of teams who look amazing right now and who power rankings would have you believe are great, haven't played very tough schedules. The exception to that is probably Ohio State, if we're being honest. Like a team that is statistically impressive and who has played a tough strength of schedule, that would be Ohio State. Alabama, I don't care that they're top 10 in efficiency. Their tackles suck. Their defense, well, it's elite, but it's not number one. And their wide receiver core looked good because Texas A&M's secondary is about as efficient as Michigan State's from 2 years ago. But again, a lot of that is just personal opinion, at least in the sense of the secondary and rankings, because at this point, we haven't played 12 games. We've only played 6 games, in some cases 5 for Ohio State. So if Michigan ends up going 11-1, it honestly wouldn't surprise me. I think the strength of schedule could come back to bite them in the butt. So I mean that's just my opinion. Let me look at the other. JJ, Kirby is a better defensive mind than Minter and McDonald. Oh, absolutely. I'm not questioning that. Michigan only has the better defense right now because Georgia lost everyone for 2 consecutive years on defense. Michigan returned all their key players from last season. So they have that experience and returning production edge that Georgia doesn't have. And you can't make up for all of that with coaching, especially when they're starting Malachi Starks at safety, young player. He's the best safety in all of college football right now, but he's still a young player. They're starting Michael Williams at defensive end, another young player. I mean, they're starting guys young, and then the guys who are older who are starting were backups for several years because they could never break through. So they have an elite defense in my mind, or at least with elite potential, but it's not showing on the field to the same degree that they did in the past 2 seasons, especially 2021. I mean, this defense, period, amen, isn't 2021's defense for Georgia. Doesn't mean they have the best defensive coaching staff factoring in Kirby Smart in all of college football. That's true. But I have questions about their defense. Beetle, I think Georgia's better than Penn State. I mean, do you think that Penn State would have beaten Kentucky in the way they did? The only reason Georgia isn't ranked ahead of Michigan by me is because Kentucky was the only game that they played great in. I mean, South Carolina, Auburn, what did they do? They struggled. They labored in both of those games. Michigan hasn't labored in a game all season, even with Bowling Green. But Penn State looked sloppy against Illinois, sloppy against Northwestern. They looked great against Iowa, but I'd say beating Kentucky by how Georgia did was much more impressive than how Penn State beat Iowa. And advanced analytics would agree that Georgia is at the same level or better than Penn State. They're about the same in efficiency by ESPN, and I think Georgia's better in points per play margin. I think Georgia's top 10. Meanwhile, Penn State's just outside of the top 10, if my memory best serves me correctly. Okay. Some other comments. Why is it every time Ohio State gets a good to great win that teams lose another game either the next week or 2 weeks later? For example, Penn State 2017 or Notre Dame both seasons. Because it's very hard to beat a team who wins the rest of their 11 games. It's very hard to do. The way Michigan beat Ohio State last year, to have that Ohio State team be 11-1 and lose that way is rarity. That doesn't happen. Typically, there are very few. It's just because it's unusual. It's the realm of competition and playing a schedule that matters. Notre Dame played 3 night games in a row, and Ohio State tore their hearts out emotionally. They had to play until the end against Duke, and they just didn't have energy and motivation. And Marcus Freeman, I think he's an average, above average, maybe good coach. He's not an elite coach. You got to have a greater elite coach to continue to get up in that matter. And he's also still building his program. So Notre Dame was never going to be a national champion this year. Never. They do not have that ceiling. And in order for your team, let's say the Buckeyes or any team, to beat an opponent, and for that opponent to only have lost to you, typically in the Power 5 implies they have national championship potential. They're a Cinderella story. Notre Dame is neither of those two things. Ohio State and Michigan are greater than Georgia. Well, Potential Power would certainly agree with that. Potential Power, I think, favors both of those teams to beat Georgia by 6 points or more, neutral field. My own personal rankings have to they factor in strength of schedule. They also factor in they factor in a variety of different things. And they change on a week-to-week basis. I basically reassess every college football team after their games. So it's a little different in my actual rankings. In my personal rankings, not factoring in power rankings, they're all very close together, and you'll see where I have them organized. I'll answer these questions later because I want to get personally to my top 10. That's really what I want to get to. So make sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show regarding my top 10. So we're going to begin. Let me just close out everything here just so that, it's all clean and neat. If you make a super chat or if you have a really important question for me, I'll answer it after I finish talking about my top 10. But let me know at the end of my top 10. I'll remind you all again to remember to talk to me about your top 10. Like, write down who you think number 1 to number 10 is, and we'll talk about it afterward. So just get the stopwatch here so I can time myself. And first and foremost, we're starting off with number 10, Oregon State. So Oregon State, they controlled I didn't update that part. That's my bad. They controlled the top 10 Utah team. I'll fix that though when I upload this tomorrow. They have elite players at running back, offensive line. They have a great quarterback in DJ Uyunglele, and then Silas Bolden's a good wide receiver, and they have good tight ends as well. They allowed 40 points to California. They won 52-40. Very high scoring affair. Their defensive upside, I think, is their biggest weakness. Their overall offense, I think, is their strength. They're 5-1, 2-1 in the Pac-12. I still view this team as top 10, but I do have some questions about them moving forward, ultimately, especially on defense. I actually lowered them one spot. They were 9th last week in the top 10. At number 9, we have Texas. I saw a comment that asked regarding, well, how do you think Oklahoma's doing? And my answer to this question is, well, they beat a team who I think is top 10, which means Brent Venables is doing very well. Brent Venables I actually had rated as a below average to average head coach. He bumped up to a good to great head coach immediately after this win. Texas is 5-1, 2-1 in the Big 12. Their overall offense, I think, is still their strength. They can run, they can pass, they have a high upside there. They showed weakness against Oklahoma, though. They mentally, they had blown coverages, they threw interceptions. They just weren't, I don't know. It reminded me of old classic Texas. It really did. And it's not a good sign. In the preseason, I expected Texas to lose to Bama and not even be in the playoff conversation come late November because of upset losses. But part of that had to do with the fact that I still expected them to be somewhat mentally immature and still, exiting that phase where they weren't clutch. But when they beat Alabama, I thought that was exercised, and clearly it's not. I think that reflects more poorly on Alabama, though, than it does necessarily on Texas. I think I jumped the gun with Texas. They have elite wide receivers, tight ends, their defensive tackle room is booming, and Jonathan Brooks at running back is very impressive. Their special teams and their red zone offense have to improve if they want to survive in the playoffs or avoid another loss, because TCU and Kansas State and some of these other Big 12 schools, or even Oklahoma in what will likely be a rematch, won't be so forgiving of your mistakes. We got Florida State at 8th. They're 5-0, 3-0 in the ACC. The ACC is probably the conference where I'm the least comfortable with, so I'll keep it short and sweet. But skill positions are their strength. Their running game on both sides of the ball is their weakness. They have awesome wide receivers like Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, a high upside quarterback in Jordan Travis, great tight ends in Kyle Morlock and Jaheim Bell. They have Jared Verse at defensive end and a great secondary. Their problem, again, is the running game. They allowed Virginia Tech to rush for over 200 yards, averaging 6 yards per carry. And outside of 3 runs of 25 yards or longer, including like a 80-yard run by Trey Benson, they still struggle to run the football. So Florida State is somewhat of a hit-and-miss team. That's why they stayed at number 8 despite some losses and other unimpressive performances ahead of them. Up next at number 7, we have the Oklahoma Sooners. They were 17th last week. They're 7 right here. 6-0, 3-0 in the Big 12. Their passing offense with Dylan Gabriel and also with Andrel Anthony, who unfortunately is undergoing a season-ending surgery. But now they have Jalil Farouk, Nick Anderson, Drake Stoops, and then Austin Stugner, the tight end. They have a very competent passing attack. Jeff Lebby's a good coordinator. And the defense has made phenomenal strides. I mean, Oklahoma, you look at Pro Football Focus, their secondary consistently has players inside of the top 100 and top 50, and they impressed against Texas. They didn't play a perfect game either, but they played a much better game than Texas did. Potential Power, if you look there, Potential Power still has Texas ranked ahead of Oklahoma, but it's now by 4 or 5 points as opposed to the 12 points when I was making my prediction video. The run game on offense has to improve if they want to reach the college football playoff, because Oklahoma, whether it's Cincinnati, whether it's Iowa State, or whether it's Texas, they have won some games where they could have lost if a few circumstances changed. And I think, you can criticize me, and I very likely could be wrong, I think Oklahoma is going to lose one game in the regular season. Like, whether it's to Kansas, whether it's to BYU, I think a team that can score on them, that has an average enough defense, could cause problems for this Oklahoma team. But they're 7th until proven otherwise. They're statistically very impressive. We'll just have to see with them in the future. At number 6, we have the Penn State Nittany Lions. They're 5-0, 3-0 in the Big Ten. Their overall defense is impressive. They're starting to prepare for Ohio State. I imagine that against UMass, it'll be very much a business trip. And they have elite players at running back all across the defense. Manny Diaz has very much impressed me this year. Penn State is, I think, 2nd in points allowed per game. They're number 1 in total yards allowed per game, and they forced a plethora of turnovers. Just look at the 5 turnovers they forced from Illinois. The offense has upside, but it's very inconsistent, and I think overall their offense is their weakness. At wide receiver, they lack depth. At tight end, Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren haven't shown out as much as we expected. At running back, Singleton is not even averaging 4 yards per carry, and Katron Allen's gotten banged up. Trey Potts at times, their third stringers, actually looked like their best running back. And at quarterback, Drew Aller at one point looks like, honestly, reminds me of Josh Allen minus the turnovers. At one point, very high ceiling, another point pretty low floor. Again, minus the turnovers. Penn State is 6th because they're winning games, and I think their defense is so good and explosive that they would beat the teams behind them, even though they don't have a very impressive strength of schedule and they have questions on offense. I think that defense would, for example, feast on Texas or Oklahoma's offense, and likely Florida State's as well, as they struggle to run the football. At number 5, we have Ohio State. Ohio State has a very good chance of and they definitely will rise. If they beat Penn State, no matter how they beat Penn State, they will rise in these rankings. My problem is you cannot look like that running the football. And their identity that they currently have needs reworking. Like, as of how Ohio State played against Maryland, comparing that to how Georgia played against Kentucky and how Michigan played against Minnesota was, I think, clear night and day. Now, Maryland is better than Minnesota, and I think they're even better than Kentucky, but it's not by a good enough margin to offset how the Buckeyes looked in comparison to how the Bulldogs and how the Wolverines looked. The Bulldogs and the Wolverines were never going to lose their games, ever. And you knew that basically the minute they took the field. Michigan had a pick 6. Georgia had an explosive offensive drive. Ohio State slugged for 3 quarters and crawled, groveled, and then they got up in the 4th quarter and pulled away. You cannot do that. And given the talent they have, that was even more disheartening for me personally. So they're 5th, but there's an argument, I think, for them to be number 1, given that they have played Notre Dame. I think Maryland's a top 25 team, and their defense is impressed, and their offense, when it's in rhythm, looks like a near-elite offense. Like, they can pass. With Henderson, they can run. It's just the way they looked against Maryland really shook me, I guess is what I could say. And the offensive line is a huge part to blame for that. But 5-0, 2-0 in the Big Ten. They have to figure out their offensive line. I think that Ohio State needs to start going pass heavy if things don't improve. Penn State will be a big gauge in that, along with Purdue, because Purdue does have somewhat of a defense. If they struggle to run against Purdue, you need to go pass heavy for the rest of the season, even if that may not make you more physical, that may not make the fan base happy. Maybe that doesn't improve the team's chances of beating Michigan. If your team's 9-2 entering the game, which is unlikely but possible, if they're 9-2 entering the game, even with maybe a run game that's finally hitting its stride, Michigan is likely still going to win. I know I'm spending a lot of time on Ohio State here, but they have a high ceiling. Their ceiling, I think, might be the best in all of college football, but they haven't accessed that yet. And that's concerning, given that they have Penn State coming up and a trip to Wisconsin immediately after that. And Wisconsin, if they pull themselves together, can be dangerous. Number 4 is Georgia. They're 6-0, 3-0 in the SEC. Their passing game with Brock Bowers, with Carson Beck, with Ladd McConkey, with Arian Smith, and with Cedric Van Pran at center is impressive. They destroyed a good Kentucky team, flat out. They have elite players at tight end, offensive line, and their defensive back has elite players. I think that their front 7, defensive tackle, defensive end, linebacker, is one of the deeper rooms in the nation, or deepest fronts. The problem is I don't think they have many, if any, elite players by definition there. I think they're all a collection of near elite, great players. And I think their offensive staff's underrated. I liked how Mike Bobo attacked Kentucky's defense. Kentucky's defense was very aggressive, Georgia utilized play action. They targeted Brock Bowers, and it paid dividends. They won, 51-13. And unlike Michigan, Michigan got 2 pick sixes. All of Georgia's 51 points were offensive. So that was a great game by Georgia. But they need, let's see more of what you did against Kentucky, less of what happened against, South Carolina, and also less of what happened against Auburn. But if they continue to improve, they could be the number 1 team in the country. And I think right now, given their history, given their talent, given their head coach, they have that argument to be the number 1 team in all college football. Brock Bowers is just a total unicorn. Number 3, we have Oregon. This is fun, and you already know that Washington is up here in this list too, because they had a bye week. Didn't lose. Didn't win either. They just didn't play. Oregon and Washington both had a bye in preparation for what I think is a top 3 matchup, what Potential Power thinks is a top 4 matchup or top 5 matchup, and what college football thinks is a top 8 matchup. This might be the biggest game of the year. I think the game will surpass that, but Oregon and Washington are incredible. They're efficient. Oregon is the 3rd most efficient offense in all of college football and a top 20 defense in efficiency. Washington is college football's best offense according to ESPN, and they have a top 25 defense by efficiency. The overall offense of Oregon is their strength. Their rush defense, I think Texas Tech was able to poke at it a little bit. Unfortunately, neither Stanford or Colorado or really anyone else outside of Tech can really run the football. So Oregon's been a benefactor of a weak strength of schedule, much like most teams in this top 10, and also like Washington. So the Ducks defense needs to live up to their talent. Right now it looks great, but we don't know yet. Oregon is one of these teams where I'm nitpicking here for weaknesses. I can't find much outside of much like Michigan. You haven't played anyone yet. Well, Michigan, Oregon, Washington, I think are these teams where you have to nitpick to find weaknesses. Washington, they do have a weakness that you don't have to nitpick for. We'll talk about that in a few seconds. But it's not really their fault, and they've done, I think, a great job of, minimizing it. Oregon, I think, is one of the fastest teams in college football. Their quarterback, running backs, receivers, and offensive linemen are elite. And their secondary, despite losing NFL players, has reloaded through the portal. So if they win against Washington, they might be bumped up to number 1. Same with Washington if they beat Oregon. And speaking of Washington here, number 2, team balancing, I think, is the weakness of Washington. And really, that's just a nice euphemism for you don't have a good running back room, so you're very pass heavy. But they're 5-0, 2-0 in the Pac-12. They, too, facing off against a big-time opponent this week in Oregon. They have elite players at wide receiver, tight end, O-line, and I think their defensive tackles and defensive ends, along with their quarterback Michael Penix Jr., are elite. Penix has nearly 2,000 yards passing. He is, I think, 2nd or 3rd in the country in quarterback efficiency rating. What more can you ask of Washington, especially when their main running back, Cameron Davis, was hurt? He was going to be their starter there. If he is their running back and Mateo Melee is still healthy at center, we might be talking about this team as like a generational offense, like 2018 level Oklahoma offense, that kind of offense. They're very impressive, and unlike 2018 Oklahoma, this team is a defense. Very physical up front. Secondary is their concern, but at linebacker and the defensive line, they're great. The Huskies just need to become more balanced. And I don't know how they do that with Cameron Davis unfortunately being hurt, but they've used McMillan, they've used Bernard, they've used almost all of their wide receivers in the Wildcat or on end-arounds to try and switch things up and keep defenses honest, and Dylan Johnson and Will Nixon have improved in the run game. They've gotten better as time goes by. So I think balancing will just come with time. Unfortunately, there isn't much more time because Oregon is playing Washington in 2 days. But I picked the Huskies to win 45-39, If you haven't seen that video already, please check out my channel page and you'll see that as the next recommended video. Michigan's at number 1. Their only weakness is they haven't been tested. It's similar to Oregon. I mean, I have to nitpick to find weaknesses in this team. They're the most efficient team in all of college football. They're number 1 statistically in so many categories, and they just look via the eye test like college football's most dominant team. They're 6-0, 3-0 in the Big Ten. I think they had the best performance of Week 6. I think that's very much up for debate, though. I just think that Michigan has consistently done to Minnesota what they, did to Nebraska and to a lesser degree Rutgers. Georgia just had one elite game. I don't know if they can replicate what they did against Kentucky against a defense that doesn't over pursue like Kentucky's did. I mean, Kentucky's defense was very aggressive to my knowledge and from what I saw, and Georgia very much leaned on play action. So maybe in the future, if Georgia ends up being more consistent and Kentucky, gets 8, 9, 10 wins and Minnesota just goes 6-6, maybe I'll change my mind on this. But as of now, I think Michigan, with their defense, with their offense, they had the most impressive performance of Week 6. They have elite players at running back, tight end, O-line, and at every defensive position, and they have the best strength staff in all of college football. Michigan, though, has yet to face a team who can test them, and that's facts. They don't have any tests, and I think their first test of the season will come when they likely will be undefeated entering Penn State. That would be their first test of the season. They play Indiana this weekend, which likely will be a snooze fest, and Michigan State, and I think Purdue after. Those should be games where if Michigan's performing in the way they are right now, they'll dominate by halftime. So Michigan's my number 1 team. And again, Washington's 2, Oregon's 3, Georgia's 4, Ohio State's 5, Penn State 6, Oklahoma 7, Florida State 8, Texas 9, and Oregon State 10. So right off the bat, we have 3 Pac-12 teams inside the top 10. What do you guys think? I'm very curious for your thoughts. Now we're entering the question and answer session, so ask your questions. Ask them away. I'll quickly adjust my seating here because my legs and my back are just killing me. Okay. So what do you all think? Okay. So it looks like a lot of you guys were talking about the different games. Music for me, 007, I like the Baker's Dozen concept, especially with the 12-team playoff. That's going to be a really... I might take that from you. Like, I might take that idea. Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Ohio State 3, Penn State 4, Oregon 5, Oklahoma 6, Florida State 7, Alabama 8, Louisville 9, North Carolina 10, Texas 11, USC 12, Washington 13. I vehemently disagree with USC being over Washington, but that's personal opinion. At least you have USC outside of the top 10. USC is not a top 10 team. I don't even think, unless you think offense is all that matters, I guess that's the only argument for USC being inside of the top 10. USC inside of the top 10 is like a processed McDonald's burger in the toilet after someone consumed it. I mean, their defense is horrendous. But that's just me, honestly. But I like the Baker's Dozen thing. I probably, with the 12-team playoff, I might do top 15, top 25. I mean, it'll probably be different than top 10, just because with 12 teams in the playoff, I want to add some extra teams outside of the teams that I think are the top 12 teams in America. This year, Potential Power Reflects This would be perfect for the 12-team playoff. Obviously, there's like an upper tier of about 5 teams, but then the remaining 7 are pretty close. And after that remaining 7, which is 12, it'll drop way off. Sam, if you steal the Baker's Dozen idea, you have to include a group of 5 team. Well, group of 5 likely gets an auto bid. Next year, I'm going to try and rank group of 5 teams and also include them in Potential Power. So, yeah, that would sort of be a given. But thank you for letting me know of that, Brownie College Football. Okay. Let me go back to where the questions were. Um okay. Why do you think run games are down this year? This is something that I've noticed. Like, Michigan's run game from an efficiency standpoint is almost the same as last year. It's just losing big plays by Donovan Edwards, but the O-line and the running back room have improved. Ohio State is struggling more than they did last year. Penn State is really outside of Notre Dame, who struggled against Louisville, and Oregon State and USC. Um, I don't know. I think teams are trying to prioritize defending the run. This is a theory that just came to my head. Running the football, choose clock. And also, if you're a run-heavy offense, it already takes you longer to get down the field because typically pass plays are more explosive than run plays, incompletion, stop the clock, etc. Running the football means running the football gives you a better shot to establish game control. Passing the football's more boom or bust than running. With the new clock rules, if you can run the football, you have a tighter squeeze on the game now than you did last year if you can run the football effectively. Because clock melts away. The clock doesn't reset when you get a first down, and you weren't incompleting passes anyway. So I think that teams are prioritizing defending the run so that teams who can run the football well don't just limit them to 6 or 7 drives a game. That's just a theory that came in my mind. I think defenses are focusing more on defending the run. I think that's also why you're seeing Kyle McCord, in spite of his arm strength, is averaging 10 yards per pass attempt. I know he has Marvin Harrison Jr., but arm strength, man, he's lacked it at times. I think it's part of the reason why J.J. McCarthy in Michigan, they're not pass heavy. They're passing more than they did last year, but they're not pass heavy, and yet they're averaging over 10 yards per pass attempt. Georgia is averaging close to that. Texas is. Oklahoma is. I think teams are defending the run more so that their offense has a better chance, so that their offense has more chances to succeed. I could, again, totally could be wrong. Thank you, Mark, for the question. Do you think both Oregon and Washington can make the college football playoff? The answer to that's yes. It has a greater likelihood at this point than Michigan and Ohio State both reaching the college football playoff, and I'll tell you why that is. I know that Oregon and Washington both have to play Oregon State, USC, and both also have to play Utah. Utah is worse than I expected. USC somehow is worse than I mean, Potential Power had them outside of the top 15 in the preseason. They've dropped to outside of the top 20. So the Pac-12 isn't as strong as I expected in the preseason. Oregon State's a little weaker as well. Meanwhile, Washington is about as dominant, if not better, than I thought they would be. Oregon's much better than I expected. So they as in the Ducks and the Huskies have pulled themselves away from the rest of the league. They have. Number 2 is, and this is where, despite the fact that I think Michigan and Ohio State on average are better than both Oregon and Washington are, Michigan and Ohio State both cannot reach Indy. They both can't reach their championship game. But Oregon and Washington can rematch in Las Vegas. Let's say that Ohio State goes 13-0. Michigan goes 11-1. Washington and Oregon split. They meet once in the regular season, once in Las Vegas. And they both go 12-1 because they split. And let's say that Georgia comes out on top in the SEC as expected. Oklahoma and Texas just find ways to kill themselves and put themselves out of contention. And Florida State and the ACC cannibalize each other. Georgia's a lock. Ohio State's a lock. Michigan, Oregon, and Washington remain. Michigan might get in based on brand or based on the fact that maybe they look much more impressive on paper. But Washington and Oregon both have that extra win, and they have that championship game appearance that Michigan totally lacks. They also have a tougher strength of schedule. So, with both of them being able to reach their championship game, if they split to each other and beat everyone else, both of them probably get in. That's just my opinion, especially with how deep the Pac-12 is. Unless, the Big 12 produces a 12-1 Texas, or the ACC produces a 13-0 Florida State. I think if the ACC champion is one loss, they're probably out of the college football playoff, because no team in the ACC looks very impressive and or dominant right now. I think both of them can make it in the same way, but to a lesser degree, that I think both Michigan and Ohio State, or Ohio State and Penn State, or depending on how the Big Ten finishes, that two Big Ten teams can reach the college football playoff. Rank McCord, McCarthy, and Aller. McCarthy, as it stands, I'm just going to categorize them. McCarthy's a top 5 quarterback in college football. Not top 3, though. He sits in that 4 or 5 range. McCord is top 15 or top 10. I know I just critiqued him, said he's a better edition of Cade McNamara, but Cade McNamara was a top 30, 35, maybe top 25 quarterback in college football in 2021. He was good. McCord is better than that, plus he has a better supporting cast, which means he's able to learn more quickly and play to his ceiling. He's a top 15, top 10 QB. Aller is top 25, top 20. That's how I would rank both of those. Thank you, Inverted Thrills, for asking that question. Mark, USC will lose 2, maybe 3. How about this bold take that no one is going to like? They will lose 3 or 4. They're going 9-3 or 8-4. Is that an overreaction? Maybe, but losing to Washington, they're for sure losing to Washington and Oregon, in my mind, by how they play currently. And UCLA, Utah, nearly forgot about Kyle Whittingham, and Notre Dame. Those are 3 opponents who can easily beat them. They're losing 1 or 2 of those games. And Cal, don't forget about Cal. Cal put 40 on Oregon State, and Oregon State is a much better defense than USC does, and they have a similar offense. They don't have the same quarterback or wide receiver core, but they have a much better tight end room, running back room, and O-line. It pretty much evens out. Some other questions. Okay. Just having to scroll. Hypothetical. What would this year look like with the future playoff system in place? Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State would all be locks to reach the playoff. And I think that would be consensus already. Georgia is a lock, so that's 4. Pac-12, with how backloaded all the schedules are, left for decision. I'd say Oklahoma and Texas are practically locks, so that's, 6. And the future playoff system, we'll just use the old model since the Pac-12 still exists. The group of 5 left up for discussion. ACC still left up for discussion, so those, are 2 spots that are left. That's 8. The remaining 4 would be practically the, Pac-12. And, probably 2 or 3 Pac-12 teams, and then another SEC team. Most likely Alabama. I think that's how it would look like, and I think that, so the first 4 teams get byes. Those are conference champions. I think that would be Georgia and Michigan definitely occupying the top 2. I think the Pac-12 and the Big 12 would produce the next highest ranked champions, at least in my perfect world. I think the ACC is pretty weak, and that would likely be, let's go with Washington and Texas, or Oregon and Texas. I think Washington and Oregon are pretty dead even, which means if they rematch, I'd probably pick the team who lost in the regular season to win, especially if it's Oregon, given the fact that they're playing on the road. But that's just me. The next 8 teams, Oregon, I think will get in. I think Penn State and Ohio State, so that's 7 right there. Oklahoma, with how easy their schedule is, in 11-2 or 12-1 OU would definitely get in. That's 8. Florida State, I think they're winning the ACC. They'll get in. I think between Oregon State, USC, Utah, and UCLA, I think one more Pac-12 team's getting in. I'm going to settle on Oregon. Oregon State is Washington and Oregon left. They'll probably go 9-3, which means 9-3, maybe 10-2. Probably means they're out unless they go 10-2. So I'm actually going to go with... I'm not going to go with any more Pac-12 team. A 9-3 Pac-12 team's not getting in. So, oh gosh, that's tough, but maybe they would. From Group of 5, I'm going to go with Liberty, sort of bold. And I'll put a 9-3 Oregon State in, just because I think their strength of schedule is insane. And I'll also put in a... This is so difficult. 9-3 LSU. I think I think LSU is a slightly better version of USC. And I think that outside of Alabama, I mean, they could beat Bama with that offense. They could beat anyone with that offense if their defense can just get a few stops. Sam is see-through. That's mainly because of this, college football with Sam shirt. How will the Michigan fan base react as a whole if Michigan loses in the playoffs? It depends. I would say a loss in the semifinals is a waste. That would make me very mad. A loss in the national title would be perhaps even more painful, but it wouldn't be a waste whatsoever, because that would at least be improvement. Like, hey, we can win a semifinal. We're not Lincoln Riley here. At least we're Ryan Day level, where we can reach a national title game. We can punch a top 4 team in the mouth who's not in our conference. So that would be my reaction. I quickly want to get to McCord. I'm answering this comment. Shea Patterson was top 10 in QBR in 2018. He definitely wasn't a top 10 quarterback, though. So that's a counter argument, but I do think he's a top 10 quarterback. Top 10, top 15. He right now is the second best quarterback in the Big Ten, which is what I predicted in the preseason. I mean, he's not bad, but by Ohio State standards, he is not living up to the standard. Because C.J. Stroud basically had the offense he has right now, except a slightly better offensive line and run blocking, and the offense looked day and night. So I think there's some of that is on him, but also some of it's on, look, Ryan Day, I think, is a worse play caller right now than he was in 21 or even 22. I think the Michigan game and the offseason talk messed with his head. I mean, he's intentionally running the football when it doesn't work. His 2021, the offense wasn't the problem in 2021. Like, it wasn't that you needed to run the football more. I don't know where he got that from. The problem with Ohio State in 2021 was their defense was not elite. That was their problem. If they had 2019 OSU's defense with that offense, they don't lose to Oregon. They have a much better chance at beating Michigan. An 11-1 with how everything went, they probably don't reach the playoffs, but they go 12-1. They, destroy Utah in the Rose Bowl, and next year they probably win it all, honestly. Or they, lose to Michigan but closer, and then they win in the college football playoff. So I don't understand. Can Ohio State fans answer that question for me? Ryan Day changed the defense as he should have. The only reason I said slightly better, and I probably that wasn't the right thing to say. Ohio State's offensive line right now is pretty good at pass blocking from what I've seen, and Maryland does have underrated defensive ends. But I'm going to say he had a better offensive line, but not a miles better offensive line. The 2021 O-line had some issues that were made very much apparent when they couldn't run on Michigan's defense that struggled against the run all year in 2021. I think Kevin Wilson's departure hurt the Buckeyes offense. Honestly, they need to adapt to life without him. That's a good point that I wouldn't have thought of without you mentioning that comment. Yeah, I mean, my question before we end this video really is what changed on offense? And I'm not just asking about this year. I'm talking about last year, too. Ryan Day forcing the run isn't a 2023 thing. It's also a 2022 thing. Last year, Ohio State, even with Smith and Jigba being hurt, would have been better off passing more than they ended up doing. At least in my opinion. Charlie Huntsman, Penn State takes it all. Big Ten not only gets to the college football playoff, possibly wins it all. Surprised the Big Ten like Oklahoma did to the Big 12 last weekend. Hey, that's possible. Only pushback I'll give to that is Oklahoma was very statistically impressive entering their game against Texas, and I sort of brushed that to the side. Penn State's not as statistically impressive. Any other questions? Just looking at different things. McCord is mostly better stats than Aller. Is it mostly Marvin Harrison? No, because Aller has thrown to wide open receivers and missed by a mile. McCord, even with some accuracy questions, at least becomes accurate at the end of the game. Aller has better arm strength than McCord, better overall ceiling. McCord's the much more mature athlete. He knows the game better. Is more mature and is also more accurate. I'd say McCord is better by virtue of the eye test, not just because he has a better supporting cast. I mean, Penn State's O-line right now is good in pass block. Olu Fashanu there. Their problem is much like their offensive line similar to Ohio State's. They're bad at run blocking, good at pass blocking. Penn State has a shot against Ohio State, but they have no shot against Michigan. I'm not going to say no shot, but the way Michigan matches up with Penn State, plus Penn State's offensive struggles, plus Michigan not playing aggressively on defense, but still having highlight reel aggression moments, makes me somewhat agree with you. The only reason I say or disagree with the fact they have no shot is because it's not how college football necessarily works. But yeah, Penn State is built. They're built to compete with Ohio State. Ironically, they're built to be dominated by a Michigan team that has a good offensive line, has a good defense. I mean, Michigan, except at secondary and maybe linebacker, has better players everywhere on the field. They have the better kicker. They have the better quarterback. They have the better running back. In fact, maybe they might have two running backs better than what Penn State has. The only reason I'm hesitant to say that is Edwards hasn't performed very well, and Mullings, I need to see more from him. Also, Michigan has a great offensive line, which helps. Michigan, outside of Olu Fashanu for Penn State, Michigan probably has a better offensive lineman. Their starting five is better than everyone on Penn State's starting five outside of maybe Fashanu, and even he hasn't had his best year. Michigan has better tight ends in Barner and Loveland than Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren. On the defensive line, Michigan and Penn State defensive ends are comparable, but Michigan has the far superior defensive tackles. Linebackers comparable. I think corners comparable. Safety, due to injuries and also some big plays in the middle of the field, I would say Keaton Ellis and Penn State safeties right now are performing better than Makari Page and Rod Moore. That's not, I mean, that's when you look at it statistically, from roster, from PFF, from analytics, and from what people are saying everywhere, I think hubris might be the only thing that stops Michigan from beating Penn State by double digits. Hubris. It would take Michigan arrogance, which is a factor. It would take that to stop them beating Penn State. I look at how the Big Ten is organized right now. Penn State would be much better off improving if they had last year's schedule, where they go to Michigan, they just get that over with, and with home field advantage this season, I might even pick Penn State to beat Ohio State with home field advantage this year. But I think that both Ohio State and Michigan are going 11-0 into Columbus. So those are the questions that have been asked as of now. I'm going to see if there's any more, and I think I'll end this because I do want to look at Houston and West Virginia, and also I got videos to release tomorrow. Finally, what is the biggest surprise this year for Michigan? JJ footwork and poised, or defensive tackle standing out? I would say JJ McCarthy. I expected McCarthy to be a top 10 quarterback. I didn't think he would be this good this early, though. I'm hoping this translates. JJ McCarthy was a quarterback last year who basically played at the same level in every game, regardless of competition, outside of TCU, which was very strange. He actually had better games against Ohio State and Purdue, who had better defenses than most teams that Michigan played all season. And he had a good game against Indiana. He had a good game against Iowa. McCarthy played pretty consistent for the whole season. So by that trend, if he plays this same way against Penn State and Ohio State, where he's just, 170, 180 passer rating, completes 70% of his passes, and runs for a few scores, that would be nuts. That's my biggest surprise personally. I expected the defensive tackles to be a top 2 or top 3 room with how much they had coming back and the depth that they built, and seeing the progression from 2021 to 2022 in the defensive tackle department, not apartment. Although I'm pretty sure the defensive tackles live on campus in apartments. But Chimichanga guy, you said you had some questions, so I am going to labor to find them. I imagine they were earlier. I know it's a safety reason, but who wants this new clock rule gone next season? I know I do. The games feel lifeless this year and not as exciting. It's not for safety reasons. It's for ad revenue. It's not for safety reasons. No way. This is conspiracy theorist here. I doubt that's for safety reasons. That is totally for ad revenue, and totally for the fact that most Americans, with how inflation and the economy is going, no longer have 4 hours of their day to watch a college football game. It's to squeeze life out of the sport and make some money off of it. I want them gone. Injuries still happen. The new clock rules are going to cause safety. And then, Marvin Harrison Jr., that block, different things happen, probably tears his Achilles. Seriously? You're shortening the game. That decreases the probability of being injured by a few percentage points? Sometimes by no percentage points, because for some games, the games are just as long. It's typically against, in good matchups, the good matchups are the ones that are shortened the most because they can drive on opponent defenses. Like Michigan playing Minnesota, that was about a typical length of a college football game from last year because Minnesota was constantly punting, multiple incompletions, etc. It's in good games where everything's penalized, and I hate it. I hope it's gone next year, but I doubt that's changing. It might, maybe after a few seasons it'll be changed. I can't see that being there forever, but I think it'll be here for a long time. How good can Florida State do this year? Florida State can reach the college. Florida State can do as well as TCU did last year. If they reach the national title, they're probably losing by multiple touchdowns. Not as bad as TCU. They can go 14-1 or 13-2, including a loss in the national title. That, Nathan, is how good I think Florida State can do this season. I think the targeting rule and the fair catch rules were smart. Very smart to decrease injuries. What say you, Sam? I agree with that. I mean, like, yeah, fair catch for the kickoff, and it's automatically at the 20. That way, you know, kickoffs are, that's where a lot of the injuries occur, is, you know, kickoffs and punts and all that different stuff. I think those are smart. The targeting rule, I hate how players are taken out for like a whole game. I don't like that. I think maybe it should be penalized to a half or a quarter, because a lot of those are sometimes incidental, and just giving a 15-yard penalty or taking you out for a quarter would send the message, I think, very much. Penn State with 12 players beats Michigan. Okay, here's a joke. You're going to hear me say this in my Notre Dame USC preview. Marcus Freeman's defense with 10 men on the field is better than Alex Grinch's with 12 men on the field. If that gives you a hint of where I'm going with my Notre Dame USC prediction, you're welcome. I'm going to say it one more time. Marcus Freeman's defense with 10 men on the field is better than Alex Grinch's with 12. Fact. Argue it. Loveland is going to be the key versus Ohio State and Penn State. I can buy that. Tight end is a very important position, especially in a pro spread offense like Michigan's. Okay. Any more questions that we see? What about being able to challenge, review pass interference penalties during the game instead of the NCAA saying are bad after the game? I think that'd be good. Like having a review process. I think that'd be good. I mean, the NFL has that where like I think they instantly like review. I don't know about penalties. I think it's like plays. Like they instantly review everything. I think that'd be very smart in college football. That's just my opinion. Okay. Doesn't look like there are any more questions, but thank you guys very much for being on this stream. We've been on here for like an hour 45 minutes. Thank you for the donations, for 36 likes, and for a consistent 30 viewers. Thank you so much for watching, and you'll see me tomorrow easily with a lot more content. Thank you all very much, and I will see you around. Before we leave, any speculation about what is going on with Edwards playing hurt or bought all the hype this offseason and got lazy? I think he has some hubris. That's me. I think he has hubris. He's too talented to let Kalel Mullings look like a better running back than him. And that's no disrespect to Kalel Mullings. It's just Kalel Mullings played as a linebacker. He's still getting used to the running back game. And right now, Mullings looks like the better running back. So I think he let it get to his head a little bit. And that's a shame. But the rest of the team hasn't. And I think Edwards at some point is going to have a good game. He's too talented of a player, and he is too good of a position coach in Mike Hart. My playoff prediction as of right now, honestly, Brownie College Football, it's Michigan, it's Georgia, it's Washington. That fourth team, I'd say, is between Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Florida State. Oklahoma, too. I'm going to go with Florida State against them, especially if they lose. Oklahoma going 12-1 would be like Wisconsin going 12-1 in 20 whatchamacallit in 2017. It would be held against them. That's all I have to say though. So, thank you all for watching. And I did mention my playoff predictions to you, Brownie College Football. So, thank you for asking that question again. As of now, I'd say Florida State, Washington, Georgia, and Michigan. I'd like to say that Florida State messes up somewhere, but with Miami losing the way they did, and I don't trust North Carolina, I think there's a good chance Florida State goes 13-0, much like their 2014 team. Unfortunately, they'd get in over a much more deserving 11-1 Ohio State, 12-1, or even an 11-2 Oregon, etc. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all around. Bye-bye.